Hi, this is Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, which started out as the Nothing is Canceled book tour when the pandemic started, because I just couldn't believe that we weren't going to have news about authors and bookstores and all of that. And we're now in our third year, and we're really, really happy about it. So today is really special because we have an author I just love. I've loved all her books, and I love this one in particular. Look at this gorgeous cover. Time's Mouth. I'm sorry, it's reversing. I don't know how to unreverse it. Time's Mouth by Edan Lepucki. And you can order this at We Love at mightyblazebookshop.org because it connects you to your favorite indie, or you can just walk down the street to your favorite indie. So, also, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to pop them in the chat. Don't be shy. I will do the questioning and you can hide if you want to. You don't even have to say your name. So I want to say a little bit about Edan. Edan Lepucki is the author of the novella, If You're Not Yet Like Me, and the novels California, which is wonderful, Women Number 17, which is also wonderful, and Time's Mouth. California debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list and was a number 1 bestseller on the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and more. California was a fall selection of Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Writers program. Woman Number 17 also racked up the raves from Washington Post, the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and it was number 3 on Entertainment Weekly's must list. People magazine selected Woman Number 17 for the Book of the Month Club. It was named a Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, Pop Sugar, and The Main Edge. Edan created the popular Instagram, which we're going to talk about, Mothers Before, and she edited a book inspired by the project. She's a graduate of Oberlin College and the University of Iowa, and her fiction and nonfiction have been published everywhere. Esquire, McSweeney's. The Los Angeles Times named her a face to watch for 2014, and she's certainly a face to watch for now. So let's hear some of the raves for the book. Lepucki is known for combining domestic realism with a magical worldview and sci-fi adjacent elements. Here there's an isolation chamber in a box in the garage inspired by Reich's Orgone accumulator, and for evoking California in all its real, surreal, and unreal glory. She does it again. This emotionally intense, wildly imaginative novel is both down to earth and out to lunch, which is the best adjective I've ever heard of. One of a kind. Kirkus reviews, and Kirkus generally can be prickly, so this makes a great review like that even better. So Time's Mouth begins with a literal trip. A bad childhood, and heads for a different life with a new name, Ursa. Her adventures in California unfurl through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the book follows 3 generations of parenting and the resentment that's festered over decades. It's just like this incredible book. So first, before we start talking, I want to welcome you, Edan. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me, Caroline. That was such a nice introduction. Happy to be here to the virtual cloud thing
It's
floating on.
Yeah, it's kind of time traveling in a way. So how did the idea, I read a piece by you where you said the idea for Time's Mouth came about because of your baby Ginger. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I started this book it's hard to believe, but early 2016. And the first inspiration was my daughter, Ginger's my second child. She's now almost 8. And when she was born, she just had this like gaze about her. She had these big blue eyes, and if I were a hippy dippy sort, I might call her like an old soul. But she had that vibe about her. And I just remember thinking, oh, she has my number. Like somehow I know her. And I have had that with all of my kids in some ways because I carried them and then they're on the outside and they were on the inside before. But I thought, oh, wow, maybe she's magical. And then I thought, well, that would be a really cool idea for a book, having a magical baby. At the same time, or kind of marinating together for years, I had this other idea of when my first kid was born, the writer Ben Fountain, he said to me, his kids at the time were old, 19 or older or something. And he said, oh, I don't want to do it again. I don't want to be a parent from the beginning, but if I could just go back in time and be with my son, he said, if I could just sit with my son when he was 3 on the couch, just for even 2 minutes, I would do it. And so that kind of stuck with me. And then as both my kids aged, now I have a third child, I've had that thought again and again, if only I could go back in time and be with them. So somehow I took a magical baby and the going back in time idea, and they found their way into this sort of wild book.
I love that. I love that. We were talking a little bit about this before we came on, about how nobody ever tells you when you're a parent that those moments when they're gone, they're really gone, but they're not gone inside of you. I mean, there are moments where I can feel my son, who is now 27, I can feel him as being 3, sitting on my lap. I can hear his little voice. And those things are so, so precious. And I too, if I could go back, I would do that just for a moment. Just for a moment.
See, well, I think I had to learn my lesson, and it seems like it's dangerous if you could do that. That what makes you a great parent is that that you keep that past inside of you, and you let go, and you also recognize the kind of preciousness of the time together. But I do think that every parent is a time traveler, because when you look at your child, you're sort of existing in you're existing in the present as they, in their needs right now, and they're persistent, especially when they're younger. But you also see them as their various younger selves kind of tucked into their present. And then you can't help but kind of catapult them into the future and worry about them. What are they going to, how are they going to be? How is the planet going to be here for them? Are they going to find love? Are they going to find a rewarding job? Are they going to be able to pay their rent? All these questions that you're always thinking about the future for them also. So I feel like as parents, we're kind of always dealing with all of them.
You probably know this, but if you don't, it's a fun fact that the DNA from your children stays inside the mom forever. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And
that is, I love it. I know this fact. I just love how sometimes science is just straight up fantasy novel.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's also the whole thing about cellular memories, where if you have your kid's DNA, somewhere inside you have some of their memories that, that maybe you just have the memories of your child as a baby, but you might have the cellular memory of your ancestors as well, which is also kind of interesting. I always like to look at things that are kind of spooky, like psychics and mediums, as science, you know, and kind of quantum physics. That maybe if quantum physics says there's no time, that everything is happening at the same time, then that's why a medium can tell you in 2 more years this is going to happen, and it happens.
Yes, exactly. Right. There's proof.
Absolutely. So tell us about Ursa's gift.
Ursa, so as you said, she's born with the name Sharon, the kind of a pretty typical name, but she represses her past, so you don't get very much of it. But she has a troubled childhood, particularly with her father, and when she is 15, I believe, she stumbles upon this gift where she can go back in time to moments of her own past. And at first, she doesn't really know what it is and know what to do with it, but essentially it's like she enters into kind of a waking dream state. And so in the present, you would just see sort of her body and maybe her eyes half closed. She might be moaning or something, but within her, she is actually literally going back in time, and it's almost like she haunts the past as a ghost. So imagine if you could go back to a moment and you're both feeling everything that you were feeling at the moment and kind of know what you're about to say as you say it, and you feel the emotions of it, but you're also at the same time watching it. So you have this sort of double effect. So that's what she can do, which is kind of a useless talent.
But it's a comforting one.
It's a comforting one, and also dangerous because you don't want to go to certain moments in your past if the past is a scary one.
Right.
How do you live in the present if you can always go to the past? But she has this power, and she's like, well, if I could do this, I can hitchhike from Connecticut to San Francisco. And, ends up in San Francisco as one might in the 50s, meets some, beatniks, bohemians, and ends up basically given a house in the woods of Santa Cruz to practice her talent, her art, her gift.
So I want to ask, do you think that a lot of that is sort of like writing? When you get in that, no, I'm serious, because like when you're writing, you're sort of in another world. You're traveling to another world. And especially if you're writing about a different time period. Did you ever have a moment where you were so deeply in that time period that it was kind of a shock to stop writing and realize that you're in 2023?
Well, a few things. I think one, when you really are in a flow state, or whatever you want to call it, in writing, you do go elsewhere. I always say I don't meditate, but I write, because I think there's some sort of like focus unfocus thing that happens when, I mean, it doesn't always happen, but the writers who are listening, like when it's good, it's so good. There's almost like a euphoria. You've locked into something. And the time, I always listen to music when I'm writing, and I know the writing is going well when suddenly I've gone past 6 songs and I didn't even hear them. So I do kind of depart in some way. I don't think it is particular to the time frame. Like, I don't think I got because I don't usually write historical stuff. So whenever I was in like 1950 San Francisco, there was a lot of, I think, anxiety from me craft wise to make it feel realistic and have the details to be just so. But I have definitely gotten lost in a paragraph. My friend Megan said, because there's a part in the book where Ursa, she's in this house and women come to her because when they watch her time travel, they feel the atmosphere changes and it feels almost like a drug to be near her, and they keep it from the children. And there's all this stuff about how time travel is anathema to child rearing because kids get in the way. And she was like, this is not about time travel. This is about you writing and having your kids in the way and you thinking through that in a fictive landscape. And I was like, well, that's pretty dark, but there is some truth to it, where it is very hard to have a writing practice with kids around. I could never write in a room with my children because they would be bothering me for string cheese, to show me something, to ask me to do something. They are very loud, and as they should be. They should be all of those things. And so writing really requires retreat, I think.
Yeah. It's funny, when Max was a baby, I could have him in a bassinet by me. He would wake every 2 hours, and the 2 hours when he would sleep, I would just get in the zone right. And then the 2 hours when he was awake, we would play or do whatever. But you're right. There's also the thing where you have to watch kids, at least when they're young.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want them picking up the scissors and saying, oh, what's this?
Yeah.
So I want to ask, what music do you listen to? And did you have a particular soundtrack for Time's Mouth?
Yeah, I tend to make what I call writing mixes. And a lot of the same songs will carry over from mix to mix. I listen to a lot of music with words. Some people just listen to classical or something, but I'm not sophisticated enough for that, I think. I like to have words I like to have the lyrics because I like to get into like an emotive state. I kind of listen to some like slow, depressing music.
I love slow, depressing music.
So I listen to like Phoebe Bridgers. I really like Big Thief. For this book in particular, I had this is actually, his name is Julius Shulman. He was that's his name. He was a minimalist composer, and he wild up this LA classical music group. They put out an album of his work, and it's sort of strange, and there's a lot of repeated sounds, and it's kind of eerie. So I would listen to that particularly for the Santa Cruz sections because it's kind of scary and kind of weird and interesting, and I liked getting into that place. Later, some of the characters moved to LA in the 80s, so I listen, and Joy Division is in the book, so I would listen to some Joy Division to kind of get into those particular scenes. But kind of sad, beautiful music is really what I'm looking for. And then I always have some dance music in there, like SZA or something, to get up and dance as like a break.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely great. I think music is, sometimes I work in silence, but I like to have music too. But it can't be new music, because then I'll stop and I'll listen.
Yes, I
sort of
have that.
vision.
I often will I'll really get into a song and I'll have to listen to it over and over and over again. And then it can kind of migrate to the writing mix. Exactly.
Okay, here's a cultural question for you. Why do you think that today's people are so obsessed with, time and time travel? And there's a lot of movies about it, and there are books about it. Although your book isn't specifically time travel, it's more like nuanced, and it's almost like a kind of living nostalgia, I would say. But what is it about time travel that you think is attractive? And if you could go back, where would you go back and why?
A lot of time travel novels have come out recently, and I know a lot of them were written during the pandemic, which makes
Right.
sense because your
That makes sense.
sense of time was totally warped. Like a day felt like a million years. And so I think that's why those writers wrote a time travel book. My book
Right.
took forever, so I was writing it
Oh,
before the
right, you were
pandemic and
ready.
after the
That's
pandemic.
right. That's
But I mean,
right.
I do think the internet for sure has altered people's understanding of time. It has made us want things more immediately. It has allowed the past to come back in this way. Nobody's ever kind of gone in this strange way. I think
Mhm.
when celebrities die and you have this experience of seeing them die again and again with these
Right.
constant like
Right.
tribute posts, and I don't have anything against those posts, but I don't write them usually because I don't like reliving someone's death again and again for 3 days. And yet that's sort of our modern condition, and I'm okay with that. But I do think it has really mucked up our understanding of how time works. And so people want that. And I do think with the way that people are consuming all kinds of media, it's affected how we are reading and the kind of narratives we want. So our narratives are changing based on,
Right.
I think it's interesting to see how a novel reads 200 years ago versus now. And I'm not smart enough, or not that I'm not smart enough, but I haven't given it enough time to think about how that might have changed the way we write stories, but there must be
It's
something there.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that stories you can't, like, if you read Dickens or 18th, 19th century novels, they take their time. They
Yes, you
can
have to
start
slow down.
yeah, you can start a chapter describing a house for like 10 pages.
Yeah.
But if you did that now, the editor would say, nope, no, 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 no.
Nope.
Where's the inside of the incident? Let's go, let's go, let's go.
And even in my book, it's been interesting. I think a lot happens in my book, and some people are like, it's so engrossing. I stayed up all night to finish it. And then other people are like, nothing happens. I was bored. I'm like,
Oh my
okay. I just think people have different
God.
metabolisms for story.
Right.
And it's kind of I rather than take it as like, I mean, it stings, but rather than take it badly, I'm just more curious about what makes people like, what's the speed that you want a story to unfold? Is that based on other things you read, other media you consume, what your own lifestyle is? I think it's just a really interesting question.
I think it's personal to the reader, and it's not to be taken as a slam in any way. Certain not all books are for all readers. And
True.
as anybody who's ever gotten a really weird review will attest, that sometimes people miss your intention in your book.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about cults and community, which is actually something that I'm really interested in, because the whole idea of a cult is to be safe and part of something, and you always have this sort of structure and stuff. Ray and Cherry and Sharon are all in a kind of cult, and I wanted to ask you, what do you personally think that yearning is about the whole promise of what a cult should be, and why they don't deliver? I'm also asking this because I had my coming of age in the 70s, and I actually had friends who went out to join cults, to go back to the land, and they all came back. They all came back to the cities. I mean, nothing ever worked, but there was always this deep disappointing, because it should work, and yet it doesn't. So tell us about your thoughts on that.
I mean, I like to say cults are irresistible.
Literally. They
Um,
are.
I think it is they're really fascinating to me. And people are always like, would you be into a cult? And I don't I don't think I could be led into one. But I am interested in enclosed communities in the ways, like you say, they offer structure, safety. And in the case of my book, I was really interested in writing about a cult leader, Ursa, who doesn't really intend to become one, but through her gift and people coming to her and then her liking the audience of these people, she's kind of a despotic ruler of this cult. And I don't know if it really is a cult because they're not trying to grow their membership,
Right,
but they do
right.
have cult-like attributes, and it is a kind of toxic environment that is offering safety but is actually toxic. And I think a lot of cults are like that because somebody's trying to get power by demeaning these people. I am so curious about why people want to be parts of those communities. I think there is the idealism, the idea of we can make this communal place work, this retreat from society. I mean, I
Mhm.
think you can't really, just in the way that you can't fully reject the culture and you can say, I'm not going to use this kind of language, but you're still steeped in the culture. Like I can work towards being less fat phobic, for instance, but I know that I'm kind of swimming in fat phobia all the time in the culture like that. We're always in it. So I think the
Right,
idea of
right.
removing oneself is so seductive, but impossible. So I'm more
Yeah.
interested as a person, how can we work within systems? But that's all to say, people, I understand why that's seductive retreat. I think people who get really into the nefarious cults, like, I don't know,
Oh, yeah,
Nexium.
that's X, or I think it was called
Yeah.
X, the sex cult.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think whenever I watch a documentary, and this is, I don't want to blame the victim, but oftentimes when you see people who have been in cults, they have a certain quality about them that I call the black hole of need. There
Yes.
is something about them, some wound that cannot be packed, right? And I think that's just really interesting and makes me wonder what kind of cure are they looking for? What happened to them that made them need this? So I think, like, if one of my kids got wrapped up in a cult, I think I would be like, well, what did I do to them that made them need the cult?
Yeah, yeah, it's tremendously interesting. So I was astounded, absolutely astounded, to hear the Times Mouth didn't sell it first. First, because if a best-selling, critically acclaimed, wonderful author like you has trouble, what happens to everyone else who isn't best-selling and acclaimed? And what was in it? What was in you that allowed you to resist and say, I'm not giving up. I'm going to figure this out? Because I think it's important that writers out there hear this, that all writers have trouble and we all do rework and we all get rejections. And yet here you are with this gorgeous book.
Yes, this was quite a road. And part of me is thinking, maybe I shouldn't talk about that because people will think, oh, this book isn't good. That's why you had a hard
No,
time
no, no.
selling it.
This book
And
is great.
I mean, and I am, but I welcome the question because I do think it's important for people to understand,
Yeah.
especially if people who are trying to write know kind of how it works. I mean, I had a first book that was a bestseller, almost like a fluke because Stephen Colbert, it was on Stephen Colbert, it was championed to be pre-ordered. So it became a bestseller in a way that I don't think anyone expected. I mean, that book sold at auction. It wasn't as if that book didn't have money behind it
Right.
and interest,
Right.
but I
Right.
don't think anybody expected it to do as well as it did, including me. And then I sold my second book to a different publishing house because it was really different from California, and my previous editors were just not as excited about the new book. And then that book, was very easy to sell, as you might imagine. And I did not expect to make back the advance on my second book, but I don't think anybody expected that. I just took the money and ran. And that money was life-changing money. I could buy a house. I could, pay off
Right.
my loans. I mean, it was really important. That money, I still have a lot of that money in retirement, like that I'm sitting on because I
It's great.
know that, I mean, obviously not most of it, but some of it. But because I know the writing life has a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah.
And then when I had the new book, by the time I was ready to sell it, nobody at the company was there anymore because that's how corporate
Which
publishing works.
happens. Yep.
And it was, again, a different book where I have a bad habit of presenting through books that are different from one another. So I think I'm kind of harder to pin down. So if you read California, maybe you were expecting another post-apocalyptic. I don't know what you would be expecting, but it probably was not Woman Number 17, which I would call a kind of dark comic noir. I don't know, maybe noir. And then I suddenly had this time travel book. And so it didn't sell to the new editors at my press that had published Woman Number 17, and we sent it out. And I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, I think it was a common story where, because I had sold before, suddenly my second book was like, it felt almost like it didn't sell as well. So I'm kind of a disappointment. And so I suddenly had a good book and then a not great book in terms of sales. I had great reviews. And then, so they wanted to bring me back in a big way. And they didn't think Time's Mouth could be that book. And I also think editors work so hard and they just don't have enough time to edit books deeply or in the ways they want. And they had bosses who are very obsessed with the bottom line. So if you have a book that's a little bit wacky, which is maybe longer, not really as straightforward, and you know, what do you do with it? When my editor, Dan Smetanka at Counterpoint, bought the book, he had a really strong editorial vision for it. And I had previous editors. I had one editor who loved it almost exactly as it was, but then she didn't think it was going to be a big seller, so she couldn't buy it. But Dan was like, I don't love this book exactly as it is. I have a lot of big ideas. And I revised it for him in this really intense way for a year. And so the book that you see now is a lot different actually than the book that was on submission. So a part of me thinks, you know, if I sent this book out on submission, I think I could have sold it for a lot of money. I mean, I tell myself that. But, you know, I just am very transparent about things because I feel
it's
like
important to me.
You know, I feel very proud of this book. I think it's a good book. It's doing really well. And so I'm like, you know, it did sell. Why I believed in it, I don't know. I mean, there was a point where I started a new book. The book had been on submission. It wasn't really selling. It had a lot of close calls. And then I thought, you know, I'm going to write a new book. But then that book just was not exciting to me. And I just was like, we have to try one more time. And so then Dan, who I had always knew, I knew that he was like a legendary editor. And I really believed that he could make the book better. I loved his ideas. And I think Counterpoint puts out great books. And I knew that they would do a good job by it. And I was like, every book I've had a different publisher. I would really like to stay with the same publishing house and feel like my career matters to them and that I'm cared for and that we can work together. And so that was kind of the most important thing to me. So that's where I'm at now. I mean, I don't know. What I always tell myself and I try to tell everyone is your career is long. And Caroline, you know this. We were just talking about books that are hits and books that aren't. And you just keep writing. And
you keep writing. There's a very famous quote, and is it Martha Graham? I don't remember. It was something about, you know, let the critics talk and everybody else do what they're doing. You just keep making art. Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing to remember. And I think it's great to, you know, see this let me show the gorgeous cover again, to see this gorgeous, gorgeous book, Time's Mouth, and realize that every book is like every career, like up and down, and so much is timing and luck, but that has nothing to do with creating great art. Now I have to ask you, because I'm curious, what was the book about that you started to write and then you gave up?
Oh, that book, somebody wants to write this book, you should. It was about a mother whose son it's a pretty good idea, but I just did not write. It's her adult son became like an anti-abortion activist. Like he became like radicalized, and she herself was not, she was pro-choice. But then she was going to end up helping him like in his cause, even though she didn't believe it.
Why would she do that?
I don't know. That's probably why I didn't want to write the book. But then she also had a chef. Her husband was a chef. That was one thing.
That's fun to write. I love to write about chefs.
I was like, I think the problem was that I was like, I'm going to write, okay, this crazy book that covers 100 years or whatever can't sell. I'm going to write like a little thriller. So it started with like the son giving her a gun. And I just was like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. This is not my book. It was like, I often have, I don't know if you write a lot of books, so you probably have this. I have almost like a tick in my mind where I can start writing stories in my mind that I know are not mine. Like they're just not in my
Right.
voice. They're not something I could, but I could like just like
Tell it. Right.
improvise a story. But it
Yeah.
wasn't for my plucking. So if somebody wants that free idea, just go for it. I
There
think it
you
could be a
go.
really good book.
There you go. I just want to add, be sure to credit Eden for the
Yeah,
idea
put me in
and the
the acknowledgments.
acknowledgments. Okay, so what is it about California that pulls you from one novel to the next? Do you consider always felt that pull? Were you born in California? What do you think
I
the mystique is of it?
Yeah. I was born and raised in California. I did stints in the Midwest for college and graduate school, but otherwise I've always lived in California. My parents came to LA from New Jersey. My older sisters were already born, but my mom was actually pregnant with me. So I was the child that was born in California.
Oh,
And
that's a
my
mystique.
my parents have always kind of mythologized this place. I think because they come from somewhere else. And I don't think it wasn't until really I went to college that I realized that LA in particular was this different place. Like I just thought everything around me was normal because it was my life. And then I went to college and I realized everything from the weather to what people eat to the plants, everything is kind of different. And I think that can be true of any place. I actually don't think California is special. I think it has certainly a history about it, a myth about it that everybody knows. But if you look closely at any place, there are these intriguing things about it that make it exceptional. But I don't know. I love it here. I think it's highly problematic in a lot of ways. I think it's very mystical, mysterious. I think it's sexy. I think it's dirty. I think it's great. I mean, I have all these competing feelings about California that make it great for fiction. And I didn't intend to, be a California author or write about LA or California, but at this point now I'm conscious of it. Now I'm like, okay, obviously this is one of my subjects and I live here. So how could I really write about anywhere else?
That's great. Yeah, it does have somehow the coasts have this mystique.
Yeah.
Oh, we have an audience question for you. I'm going to just pop it up. Whoops. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Do you read fiction when you are writing fiction? I assume that means fiction.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Somebody's doing construction right outside, so hopefully you guys can't hear that. Do you hear that vibrating?
Don't hear it at all. Nope.
I do. I do read F when I'm writing F. I'm always. It takes me years to write books, so I don't know how anyone could not read fiction when they were writing fiction unless you just gave up on fiction altogether.
Right.
I actually mostly read fiction. I wish I were a better reader of other genres. But I read, I do listen to nonfiction on audio when I'm walking. But for the most part, I'm just always reading books. And sometimes most of the books I'm reading are just for fun, unless I'm reviewing. I'm just kind of just always reading. I just love to read. That's why I'm a writer. So
I know. Oh, wait, we have another question. It's right in front of me. What writing advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would give my younger self two pieces of advice. One is keep going. I think when you're younger, you expect immediate returns on the investment. And, it took me a long time. I wrote a book that never got published, and then I wrote California and got that published. And so I would just remind my younger self that I'm in it for the long haul and it might take a long time, but it's worth the wait. And the writing that you do, none of the writing will be time wasted. And then the other thing would be about revision, which I feel like is a lesson I only just learned doing Time's Mouth, is that with the rewriting process that I did with Dan, my editor, we would just have these phone calls where we kind of brainstorm and spitball, and then I would go and write, and then I'd send him the pages. But I kind of really learned revision, seeing it anew and thinking about what I meant to say. What are these deeper subjects of this narrative? And how can I connect the dots? But I think before that, my revision, I did rework things and edit, but I really see the value of that process now that I wish I had known when I was younger.
Yeah, there's a lot of new writers who believe that, you sit and you write, and the muse comes and takes care of
Yeah.
stuff. And my feeling is, well, if the muse is revision number 35, then that's the muse, but
Yeah.
it never just sort of comes about it.
No.
I wanted to ask you about, well, first I have two more questions. One is that I wanted to know, how did you come about with the structure of the novel with three generations? Did you map it out? Did you use post-its? Did it make you crazy?
I mean, it made me. I always say if I could time travel, I'd go back in time and not write this book.
No.
No way now. But there were times in the book where I was like, why did I think this was going to be easy or even fun? It was actually really fun at different times. But I don't map out my books at a time. I don't write post-its. I always write it in the order that I think it will be read. The main revision that I did with Dan was restructuring it. So the story used to be told out of order, as you might expect a time travel novel to be told. And then with Dan was like, I think you need to start at the beginning so we can see the development of Ursa, because we don't care about where Cherry and Ray come from and what they've escaped unless we can see it. So most of the revision was actually just expanding and restructuring. So the structure came last. It was the last thing I figured out. But yeah, I tend to keep it. I don't use Scrivener. I type. I'm like an old person. I write in Microsoft Word. I write little notes to myself by hand, but I don't think I'm a very visual learner. So seeing things up on post-it stuff,
Right.
I'll do it if I want to feel like I'm doing something, but it actually does not help me.
Okay. I want you to talk about our mothers as we never saw them, because it's such an interesting thing to realize that, our moms had lives and they were rebellious and feisty and dramatic and whatever else before we knew them. Talk about that.
It's Mothers Before was the Instagram. I actually started that Instagram as a funny little publicity stunt for woman number 17, because some of that novel is about trying to understand S as an artist who's trying to understand who her mother was before she was born. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool? And I don't even remember, like a lot of things that I do, I just do it on a lark, see what happens. And then it kind of took on its life of its own. And what I realized is that everyone, it seems, or most everyone, is interested in their parents before they were parents. These people that we can't know, that unseeable part of them, and that distance that you can't breach. And I think that's really beautiful. And in the Instagram and the book related, I mean, all the photos are just so cool. Like
they're incredibly cool.
They're incredible. And they're just like random snapshots. And some others are really beautiful. Some seem mysterious. Some are really goofy. There's like, I'm, of course, because of me knowing my work, like I don't love the ones that are just like, my mom is selfless and we have the amazing love.
Right.
I love it. People kind of wrestle with, like, for one, I have a really strong relationship with my mother. But I would never call her selfless, because that seems like a dig at her. Like
that seems like you're putting her in 19.
Yeah, she has a self that is,
right.
Mothering is part of it, but there's something else not related to mothering there. So I just think it's interesting to kind of like interrogate who these women were. And I think it's important, especially for mothers, because I think once you get the identity of mother, you're supposed to be certain ways. So the ways that we can slip out of that term, I think, are useful for us to remember, because when we give our mothers their full selves, I think we're actually fighting against a kind of misogyny.
I agree. I totally agree. I have one last question, which I ask every single writer that I interview, because obviously I'm an anxious, obsessive person. What's obsessing you now and why, Eden?
Ooh, what is obsessing me right now? One, sadly, my son's grades at middle school. Now, when your kid goes to middle school, you can see all of their work, and they have this is like the saddest answer. You can go online and see everything that's due and what work they've done. So I'm like obsessive about it, which is depressing. But that's one thing.
That's a mom.
I'm trying to get obsessed about wine. Not necessarily drinking it all the time, but reading about it, thinking about it, making it, because I want to write something about that. So I'm not really a research oriented writer. I tend to just imagine things, but there's certain things about wine that I don't know. And so I need to start reading books. So I've started to read some books and look online and listen to wine making podcasts and stuff, which are really fun.
Yeah, sometimes I think it was the writer Miriam Morris told me, when you're doing research, don't look for the details and the facts as much as looking for the stories. And I remember when my most fabulous interview ever was, I just posted on Facebook years ago. I needed to talk to somebody who had been in the vicinity of the Mansons around that time.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy called me, and the interview was so fabulous because he said, I just knew them as these, we all thought they were just hippies. They were a little dirtier than everybody else and maybe not as bright, but we all knew them and we'd all say hello to them. And that image just stuck with me because, then it brings it down to earth and it makes it really real. Really real.
I do have I postponed it, but I have an interview with a winemaker.
Oh, cool.
Or I'm supposed to. I got wrapped up into Time's Mouth and I said, I don't need this information yet. But what I really want to know is like, how does it feel to be, talk to me about the grapes and what is the feeling you're having? Yeah,
you need the right kind of interview to tell you, because otherwise it's like facts.
Yes,
yes.
And,
you need somebody who will be willing to bend the rules a little so it'll fit your plot.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I want to remind everybody to order Time's Mouth and all of Edan's books at bookshop.org or your fave indie. Don't forget that this interview is going to live forever on a Mighty Blaze YouTube station, so you can watch it and tell your friends and comment there if you want. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for asking questions. And Edan, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and Edan, you just hang on. Okay. So thank you all. We'll see you next time.